Winter's grip on Midgard had become a death sentence. Crops withered beneath relentless frost, rivers froze solid, and wolves prowled the edges of desperate villages. No prayers to the gods brought answers, and even Skadi, the winter goddess, remained silent. Whispers spread of an ancient prophecy. Only the return of a forgotten champion could restore balance and break winter's curse. Halfdan, a solitary hunter shunned for his mixed Norse and Danish blood, had resigned himself to survival in the wilderness, until he stumbled upon a frost-covered axe embedded in a frozen lake. The axe, known as Frostbringer, once wielded by Skadi's chosen, bound itself to him and thrust him into an ancient conflict. But to wield the Frostbringer's full power, Halfdan must confront his own doubts and prove himself a champion worthy of Skadi's blessing, or watch Midgard succumb to an endless frost. Welcome to Hugin and Munin Stories. This is our story, the Frostbringer, Skadi's forgotten champion. Chapter 1. The Whispering Frost. Winter's grip was unyielding, and the wind howled like a mournful wolf through the barren forest. Snow blanketed the ground in a white shroud, muffling the crunch of Halfdan's worn boots as he trudged forward. He tightened his threadbare cloak around his shoulders, his breath curling into the air in silvery wisps. A hunter of modest skill, Halfdan knew these woods well, though even familiarity was no shield against the harsh cold that crept into his bones. Born of two worlds, his mother a Dane, his father a Norseman, Halfdan belonged to neither. Villagers whispered behind his back, calling him cursed unworthy. He had grown used to the loneliness, wearing it like armor, but the unrelenting winter seemed determined to test his resolve. Even the game had fled the forest, leaving him with little more than hunger and silence for company. The silence was broken by a low hum that seemed to rise from the very ice beneath his feet. Halfdan paused, his brow furrowing as the sound grew louder, resonating through the stillness like the toll of a distant bell. It was not the wind, nor any creature of the wilds. It was something other. Curiosity pulled him forward, deeper into the forest. The hum guided him, growing stronger with each step, until he emerged into a clearing. Before him stretched a frozen lake, its surface gleaming like polished glass under the weak sunlight. At its center stood a jagged column of ice, and embedded within it, gleaming faintly in the frost-bound light, was an axe. The weapon was unlike anything Halfdan had seen before. Its haft was adorned with intricate runes that seemed to shimmer faintly, their glow almost imperceptible. The blade, though frosted over, held a deadly gleam, as though it had never dulled with time. Halfdan approached cautiously, the hum now a vibration he could feel in his chest. The axe seemed to call to him, not in words, but in a pull so primal it bypassed thought entirely. Against his better judgment, he stepped onto the ice, the chill seeping through the soles of his boots. The surface groaned faintly beneath his weight, but held firm. When he reached the frozen column, Halfdan hesitated. The axe exuded an aura of power, a force that made his fingers tremble as he reached out to touch it. The moment his hand brushed the haft, the hum surged into a deafening roar. A shock of cold coursed through his body, stealing the breath from his lungs as his vision went white. Images flooded his mind. A great battle in an endless blizzard, where giants of frost clashed with warriors cloaked in fire. A towering goddess stood at the heart of the storm. It was Skadi, the huntress of winter. Her sorrowful eyes bore into him as she held out the axe to a warrior, its runes glowing bright. But the vision shifted. The warrior fell, and the axe lay abandoned, frost creeping over its surface as the storm consumed the scene. Halfdan gasped, wrenching his hand back as the visions faded. His heart thundered in his chest, and his breath came in ragged bursts. The axe remained embedded in the ice, but now its runes glowed faintly like dying embers. Instinctively, He grasped the haft and pulled. The ice resisted, but with a final heave, the weapon came free. As it did, the hum stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against Halfdan's ears. The clearing seemed to hold its breath. Then came the roar. It was deep and guttural, like the groaning of glaciers. The trees on the far side of the clearing trembled as massive shapes emerged from the shadows. Frost giants, hulking figures of ice and stone, their forms shimmering with unnatural cold, stepped into the open. Their eyes glowed with malevolent light, and the frost around their feet spread like tendrils across the frozen lake. The Frostbringer awakens, rumbled the largest of the giants, his voice like the cracking of ancient ice. His gaze fixed on Halfdan and the axe in his grip. At last the time has come. Halfdan staggered backward, the weight of the axe suddenly immense in his hand. He had no idea what the Frostbringer was, or why it had chosen him, but the giant's presence left no doubt it was something they wanted, and they intended to take it. The giants began to move, their steps shaking the ice beneath them. Halfdan turned and ran, the Frostbringer pulsing with cold in his grasp. The sound of pursuit thundered behind him, each step of the giants a tremor that threatened to send him sprawling. Panic clawed at his chest as he plunged into the forest, branches whipping at his face and snow dragging at his boots. The chase was on. Chapter 2. The Giants' Awakening. The forest closed around Halfdan, its frost-laden branches forming a labyrinth of shadows and glimmers of light. The pounding of his heart drowned out nearly all other sound, but the heavy footfalls of the frost giants and their guttural growls reached him nonetheless. Each thud of their massive feet sent a shudder through the ground, making the frozen earth crackle beneath his boots. He stumbled once, nearly falling, the Frostbringer heavy in his grasp. The weapon's weight wasn't physical, it was something deeper, a burden that seemed to grow with each step. The glowing runes along its haft flickered faintly, like embers struggling against a suffocating wind. "You cannot run forever, mortal," bellowed a deep voice, chilling the air like an icy gale. Halfdan dared not look back. He leapt over a fallen tree, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. He had hunted wolves before, but he was now the prey. His mind raced, searching for some semblance of a plan. The giants would not tire, they would not falter. He could not outrun them indefinitely. The Frostbringer pulsed in his hand, a sharp, biting cold that made him gasp. It was as if the axe itself was trying to speak to him, to guide him. "Help me then," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "If you've got any magic in you, now's the time." Ahead, the forest opened into a narrow glade, its floor covered in thick snow that sparkled under the pale light. Halfdan skidded to a halt, realizing too late that the ground dipped into a shallow hollow. Before he could retreat, the frost giants emerged from the trees behind him, their immense forms blotting out the sky. There were 3 of them, hulking figures of jagged ice and ancient stone, their breaths curling into the air like plumes from a frozen forge. The largest among them, adorned with a crown of icicles, stepped forward. His voice rumbled like a glacier splitting in two. "The Frostbringer does not belong to you," he said, his icy gaze fixed on Halfdan. "Yield it, and we may grant you a swift end." Halfdan tightened his grip on the axe, his knuckles white from the cold. "I don't even know what this thing is," he shouted, his voice trembling. "Take it, if it'll stop you." He held the weapon out, but the moment he attempted to release it, the axe burned against his palm, its cold turning searing. He cried out, realizing it would not let him go. The giant sneered. "The Frostbringer chooses its bearer, but you are unworthy. That will change soon enough." The smaller giants began to encircle him, their movements slow and deliberate, like wolves closing in on a wounded deer. Panic surged in Halfdan's chest. But before he could act, the runes on the axe flared to life, casting a brilliant blue light across the glade. The giants recoiled, their glowing eyes narrowing. "It awakens," one of them growled. Halfdan felt the Frostbringer vibrate in his hands, the cold now coursing up his arms, numbing them. Instinctively, he raised the axe as the lead giant lunged forward, his immense blade descending in an arc meant to cleave Halfdan in two. The Frostbringer met the strike with a deafening crash, and a shockwave of icy air erupted from the clash, sending snow and frost spiraling into the air. Halfdan stumbled back, the force of the impact nearly wrenching the axe from his grip. The lead giant staggered but recovered quickly, his sneer replaced with a scowl. "You are nothing, mortal. The axe's power will not save you." Halfdan barely had time to react as another giant charged, swinging a club carved from frozen stone. He ducked, the weapon smashing into the snow beside him, splintering the ground. Acting on instinct, or perhaps guided by the axe, Halfdan slashed upward, the Frostbringer's blade slicing through the giant's icy arm. The wounded giant roared, a sound of pure rage that echoed through the glade. Shards of ice fell from his severed limb, but even as Halfdan scrambled to his feet, he knew he had only bought himself seconds. The third giant joined the fray, his weapon a jagged spear that gleamed with frost. Halfdan dodged, narrowly avoiding the thrust that pierced the ground where he had stood. He swung the Frostbringer wildly, the axe's runes glowing brighter with each strike. It felt as though the weapon was feeding on the battle, growing stronger with each clash. But Halfdan was tiring. His breaths came in ragged gasps and his muscles burned from the cold and exertion. He couldn't keep this up. Then, from the tree line, a new sound cut through the chaos, a sharp, commanding shout. "Hold fast, hunter." A figure charged into the glade, clad in a wolfskin cloak and wielding a sword that gleamed like polished steel. The woman was tall and strong, her braided hair catching the faint light as she leapt into the fray. With a ferocity that matched the giant's own, she struck at the nearest one, her blade finding purchase in the cracks of its icy form. The frost giant howled in pain, turning its attention to her. She spared Halfdan a glance, her blue eyes blazing. "You'll die if you stay frozen in place. Fight." Halfdan nodded, his fear momentarily overshadowed by her commanding presence. Together they pushed back against the giants, the Frostbringer's light and the woman's skill forcing the towering foes into retreat. When the final frost giant withdrew into the forest with a snarl, vowing vengeance, the woman turned to Halfdan. "I'm Thira," she said, breathing heavily. "And it seems the gods have tied our fates together." Halfdan, still clutching the Frostbringer, could only nod, too shaken to argue. Chapter 3. The Trials of Thrymheim. The forest fell silent after the battle, the snow around them untouched by the frenzy that had just passed. Halfdan stood, his body aching and his breath still heavy from the fight. He looked at the Frostbringer in his hands, the glowing runes now dimming, as if satisfied with the struggle it had witnessed. His heart raced, but there was something else beneath the fear, a stirring of power, strange and unfamiliar. Thira's presence beside him was like a steadying force. She wiped the frost from her blade with a swift motion, her eyes assessing the surrounding woods with the calm of one who had faced death too many times to fear it. "You're still alive," she said dryly, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "That's more than most would have managed. Frost giants don't make for gentle company." Halfdan nodded, too exhausted to respond, and wiped the cold sweat from his brow. "Who are you?" he finally asked. "You didn't seem concerned with your own safety." Thira offered a crooked smile. "Concerned? No, I've seen enough battles to know that death comes to us all. What matters is whether you're prepared when it does." She looked him over, noting the still firm grip he had on the Frostbringer. "But you've got a weapon now." It's not just any weapon either. Halfdan glanced at the axe, the runes now cold and unassuming. He felt an eerie sense of connection to it, as if it were a part of him. This axe is called the Frostbringer. I'm not sure why it chose me. Aye, it chooses its bearer, she said, her gaze growing serious. And you, Halfdan, are bound to it. The Frostbringer was once Skadi's champion's weapon, and when the champion fell, it vanished, lost to time. But now it's back, and it has chosen you. Which means that Skadi must need you. Need someone to restore balance. Skadi. The name echoed in Halfdan's mind, though he had little knowledge of the goddess beyond the whispers of old tales. Why me? Thyra hesitated, her eyes drifting to the horizon. You're part Dane, part Norse. That dual heritage makes you unique. Skadi once had a champion who could traverse between the worlds, between gods and mortals. But after betrayal by her own champion, she fell into sorrow, her strength broken. The balance of Midgard was shattered, and with it, the seasons began to die. Skadi has been silent for too long. Now you must go to a mountain stronghold, Thrymheim. You must restore her power and the balance of winter. Halfdan's mind spun, the weight of her words pressing down on him. I'm not a warrior. I've never been anything more than a hunter. Thyra's gaze softened, her voice quiet but firm. A hunter is a warrior in his own right. You have survived where others would have perished. The Frostbringer does not choose its bearers lightly, and it has chosen you. If you are to see this through, you must trust in your strength. Both the strength of your bloodline and the strength you've built on your own. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Halfdan knew she was right. He had never asked for this path, but it had been thrust upon him, and now he had no choice but to follow it. Thyra turned toward the distant mountains. We must leave before the giants return. Thrymheim is far, and the path will not be easy. She began walking, and Halfdan, with no other direction, fell into step beside her. The journey was long, winding through forests thick with snow and hills that stretched up into the bleak sky. As they traveled, Halfdan could feel the growing presence of the Frostbringer, its cold power curling through his hands like a living thing. At times, the runes glowed faintly, and Halfdan felt his thoughts twist in strange directions, as if the axe was trying to speak to him, urging him onward. The days bled together in a blur of icy winds and the muffled silence of winter. The two travelers did not speak much, each lost in their thoughts, but Halfdan found that Thyra was a steady companion. Her silence was not uncomfortable, but rather a shared understanding that the weight of their quest was too great for words. One evening, as the sun sank low beneath the horizon, the two of them stopped beside a frozen lake. The sky was streaked with colors of pale purple and gold, but the air was bitter cold, and Halfdan felt the ache in his bones more than he had in days. "Tell me, Thyra," he asked quietly, "why do you seek Skadi? What is it you wish from her?" She paused for a moment before answering, her breath visible in the freezing air. Skadi is a goddess of vengeance, of winter, but she is also a goddess of justice. I was once a warrior, part of a clan that served Skadi in the days of old. When my village was overrun by marauders, I sought her aid, but the goddess did not answer. For years I have wondered why. She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. Now I seek not just answers, but redemption. If the balance of the seasons is to be restored, so too must my honor. Skadi is the one who can help me reclaim both. Halfdan said nothing, letting her words settle in the cold silence. The stars began to shimmer above them, faint and distant, and for the first time in many days he felt a sense of quiet purpose. They were not just on a journey to Thrymheim. They were on a journey to restore something that had been lost, both to the gods and to themselves. As the days wore on, the terrain grew more treacherous. The winds howled, and the snowstorms grew fiercer, making the path to Thrymheim nearly impossible to follow. Halfdan's resolve was tested by the harsh conditions, but each time the Frostbringer pulsed in his hand, he felt a renewed sense of determination. And it was on the third day of their journey that they came upon the labyrinth of ice. Chapter 4. The Frostbringer's Legacy. The labyrinth stretched before them, a shimmering maze of towering ice walls that twisted and refracted the pale moonlight. The air was bitterly cold, even by the standards of the frozen wilderness, and the silence was so profound it felt, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Halfdan tightened his grip on the Frostbringer, its cold and oddly comforting presence now, as he and Thyra stepped cautiously into the labyrinth. Each turn brought with it a sense of disorientation. The walls seemed alive, shifting subtly when they weren't looking, their smooth surfaces reflecting distorted images of the pair. But it wasn't just their reflections. Halfdan saw flashes of memories in the ice. He saw himself as a boy, cast out by his peers, shivering in the snow. He saw his mother's tear-streaked face as she tried to console him, and the cold indifference of his father's gaze. "Do not linger," Thyra warned, her voice tight. She kept her eyes forward, her own hand clenched around the hilt of her sword. "The labyrinth preys on your mind. It shows you what it thinks will break you." Halfdan forced himself to look away from the haunting images. How do we know which way to go? Thyra hesitated, glancing at the Frostbringer. "The axe chose you. Trust it to guide us." The Frostbringer pulsed faintly in his hand, its runes flickering as though in answer. Halfdan took a deep breath, focusing on the weapon's subtle pull. He began to lead them, each step tentative but purposeful, as the axe seemed to respond, its glow intensifying whenever they moved in the right direction. But the labyrinth did not let them go so easily. Shadows began to stir in the icy reflections, growing darker and more menacing. The air grew colder still, and Halfdan's breath came in shallow gasps as he felt a bone-deep chill seep into his core. The shadows coalesced into forms, vague, indistinct shapes that grew sharper with each passing moment. "Frost Race," Thyra said, her voice low. They are drawn to the axe's power. The first wraith lunged, its form a swirling mass of icy wind and shadow. Halfdan swung the Frostbringer instinctively, and the axe flared with light, dispersing the wraith with a shriek. More came, their movements quick and unpredictable, and the two fought side by side, their weapons carving through the wraiths like fire through mist. The battle was exhausting, but the Frostbringer seemed to grow stronger with each wraith it struck. Its cold no longer felt like a burden. It was a part of him now, a connection he couldn't fully explain but trusted implicitly. At last they emerged from the labyrinth, battered but alive. Before them rose Thrymheim, Skadi's mountain stronghold, its jagged peaks glistening with frost. The whole at its summit was encased in ice, its once bright fires extinguished. The sight filled Halfdan with a deep sadness, as though the goddess's despair was etched into the very stone. Inside, the air was heavy with silence. Skadi sat upon a throne of ice, her figure cloaked in furs, her gaze distant and cold. She was as beautiful as the winter sky, but her presence was diminished, her strength a faint echo of what it must have once been. "You have come," she said, her voice soft but resonant. Her eyes flicked to the Frostbringer, then to Halfdan. "You bear the axe, yet you are not the one I expected." "I didn't choose this," Halfdan said, stepping forward hesitantly. "The axe chose me, and it brought me here." Skadi studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You are mortal, untested, yet the Frostbringer awakened for you. Why do you seek me?" "To restore balance," he said, his voice firm despite his uncertainty. The giants are stirring, and the winter grows harsher. I don't know why the axe chose me, but I'm here to finish what your last champion could not. Her eyes darkened at the mention of her former champion. He betrayed me, she said bitterly. He sought power for himself and turned the Frostbringer against me. When he fell, the balance was shattered. My bond with Midgard has been broken ever since. Skadi rose, her figure imposing despite her diminished power. If you are to prove yourself worthy of the Frostbringer, you must face the one who seeks to wield it now. Hrimthur, warlord of the Frost Giants. He rises in Jotunheim, and with him comes the end of all seasons. Halfdan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. How do I stop him? With this, Skadi said, extending a hand. A shard of glacial crystal appeared, glowing faintly. It is a fragment of my power, enough to break Hrimthur's enchanted crown. Without it, his hold over the frost will crumble. He took the shard, feeling its weightless cold in his palm. Skadi placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch icy but reassuring. Go, mortal. The fate of the realms rests in your hands. The descent from Thrymheim was fraught with challenges, the journey to Jotunheim demanding every ounce of their resolve. Skadi's shard, nestled securely in Halfdan's pouch, radiated an icy cold that seemed to bite through even the thickest furs, a constant reminder of the task ahead. The Frostbringer's glow guided their steps through blinding snowstorms and treacherous mountain passes, where one misstep could mean plummeting into the abyss below. Thyra proved invaluable, her instincts and experience steering them away from hidden dangers, cracks in the ice that concealed endless chasms and ridges stalked by frost wolves that prowled the night. At times she shared old warrior tales, her voice cutting through the howling winds to bolster their spirits. Halfdan, in turn, felt the Frostbringer's silent encouragement, its runes pulsing faintly as though sensing their nearness to destiny. As they approached the edges of Jotunheim, the land itself seemed to darken. The air grew heavier, and the frost took on an unnatural, sinister edge. Even the sky above seemed muted, its light dimmed by clouds churning with storm and malice. Signs of Hrimthur's influence were everywhere. Villages encased in ice, their inhabitants frozen mid-flight, and rivers transformed into jagged veins of unyielding frost. Despite the grim sights, the Frostbringer felt lighter in Halfdan's grip, its icy strength a part of him now. Thyra, too, seemed more resolute, her sword gleaming in the dim light as though eager for the battle to come. By the time they reached the frozen plain where Hrimthur's forces gathered, there was no hesitation left in their hearts. They stood at the threshold of fate, ready to confront the storm and shape the future of the realms. The final battle took place on a frozen plain at the edge of Jotunheim. Hrimthur was a colossus of ice and malice, his crown glowing with dark energy. The frost giants rallied around him, their roars shaking the earth, but Halfdan and Thyra stood firm. As Hrimthur advanced, his massive axe gleaming with frostfire, Halfdan felt the Frostbringer pulse with fierce energy. The two clashed, their weapons meeting in a cacophony of ice and fire. Thyra fought beside him, her blade striking down giants that tried to overwhelm them. Hrimthur's strength was immense, each blow forcing Halfdan back. But as the warlord raised his weapon for a killing strike, Halfdan saw his opening. With a desperate lunge, he drove the glacial shard into Hrimthur's crown. The artifact shattered, unleashing a wave of frost and light that knocked the warlord to his knees. Seizing the moment, Halfdan raised the Frostbringer and brought it down with all his might. The axe's runes flared brilliantly as it cleaved through Hrimthur's icy form, shattering the warlord into countless shards. As the frost giants fled, their power broken, the icy grip on Midgard began to thaw. The sun rose brighter than it had in months, its warmth melting the snow and ice. Skadi appeared before Halfdan and Thera, her form radiant, her strength restored. "You have done what my last champion could not," she said. "The Frostbringer is yours, Halfdan. You have proven yourself worthy." Though she offered him a place at her side, Halfdan declined. "My place is in Midgard," he said, "with my people." Skadi nodded, her gaze filled with respect. "Then go, Frostbringer. Carry my blessing and bring hope to your realm." As Halfdan and Thyra descended the mountain, the thawing land stretched before them. A reminder that even in the harshest winters, courage and determination could bring the promise of spring. And with that, we say goodbye for this time. Thank you for listening to our story, The Frostbringer, Skadi's forgotten champion.